What is up, guys? It's Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make lo-fi house drums. I've actually made a tutorial kind of similar to this in the past, but I wanted to make a newer one with some techniques I've heard in some more recent tracks, and just some new stuff I've picked up on since I made that video. So here goes. And as usual, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description for just $5 on my Bandcamp. It's the first link. You can't miss it. If you want to support me, it's a great way to do it. And yeah, here's the video. So this is a loop you heard in the intro, and I'm just going to start with the hi-hats. So the hi-hats on their own sound like this. So pretty simple. I just have this open hi-hat and then this closed one, which is just like a little small one to give it a little bit of accent. And yeah, with the small one, all it is, I'll show you the original sample. It is this. So just like a really simple sort of closed hi-hat sample, nothing really too crazy there. But all I've done is I put it in on these 16th notes to give, again, just to give the beat a little bit more swing and a little bit more groove and a little bit more accent. And then I've given these an actual swing using the track delay over here. So if you don't know what track delay is, essentially the way you turn it on is it's this little D icon down here. You just click that to turn it on and off. And what track delay does is it essentially allows you to use this thing to move the contents of your track forward ever so slightly. So it's kind of like moving it over like this. Like if I go in here and just move it over to the right like that, it's literally the same thing as doing that. It's just a little bit easier to edit it and sort of play around with different things if you're just sliding this little dial as opposed to like actually moving stuff in the arrangement. So yeah, I just use that again just to give it a little bit of swing, because without that it was a little bit too rigid, but when you turn it on, it gives it that swing and groove. And then as far as the processing goes, on both of these, it's pretty simple. I actually have the same thing on both of them. It's just this a bit warmer, which is a saturator preset that you can get under, if you go under saturator, it's literally the first one. If you've seen my videos before, you know I use this a ton. It's just a really, really great sounding preset to just beef things up and give them that little bit of like analog dirt that you want for lo-fi house. After that, on both of them, I've put this EQ on, which is actually just sort of shaped as like this bandpass peak filter-y thing that I made. It's like a bandpass filter because it's got like this kind of curve, but there's a little peak there. So I'll show you the open hi-hat with and without that. So as you can see, all it's doing is it's just cutting out all the low end, cutting out most of the high end, and then giving it, like I said, this little peak here. That's why I said it's kind of like a peak filter. It's just giving it this little bump here to sort of bring up that lo-fi-ness, I guess, like, because a lot of lo-fi house, a lot of the highs are cut, but then there's a big bump usually in the hi-hats around this area. I'm not sure exactly what. Yeah, around like between like 4 and 5 kilohertz, basically. So I just wanted to do that here. And again, that's also on the closed hi-hat. It's on both of them. Pretty simple there. It's just a matter of getting like pretty clean samples and then giving them the lo-fi sound through EQ and saturation. After that, I have this clap, which is pretty simple. It's just this nice clap sample. I'll show you the original sample. So yeah, it just sounds like that. And I didn't do too much to this one because I really liked how this sounded already. And this is like something I'll talk about in a second, which is like picking samples that just sound good right off the bat. But yeah, as far as processing goes on that one, I mean, I gave it a small bit of erosion. Just to give it a little bit of that kind of like grittiness that you get from erosion and that like bit crush sound. And then I have a saturator on there, which I just set up this preset myself. It's doing like a very little amount of drive, but enough to just give it a little bit of a boost and a little bit more girth. And then I added the analog clip and I changed the controls to look like this. You know, really not too much there, just sort of a matter of tuning it to sound good to your ears. And yeah, so like I was saying, with this sample, you know, and like with claps and kicks and stuff, with hi-hats and like different percussion sounds, I find you have a little bit more wiggle room, and that's why like with these, I took hi-hats that didn't necessarily sound the way I wanted to right off the bat, and then made them sound the way I wanted to. But with claps and kicks and like your really main powerful sounds, you want to just really find like good samples that already, again, have like that kind of feel, and then you just got to do stuff to accentuate that and bring it out more in the context of your track. And I think this is really important, so it's definitely something to keep in mind, and that's what I did with the clap here. Next thing I'll show you is this percussion, and this is pretty simple. So it's just these percussion sounds I found. I'll show you the original samples. These really don't have too much on them. So it's just like that little kind of like weird techno percussion, and then that tom sample. And then I did put on the saturator, which similar to the clap, it's just doing a little bit of drive. And then I played around actually with the soft sine setting here, and just played around with these 4 controls. Again, really not too much there. Just sort of like, again, adding a little bit of beef over top of the sound. And these are just playing like this little rhythm, just adding a little bit of accentuation to the groove, because I'll show you with it and then without it. It just felt like it didn't really bounce enough. Like, something about lo-fi house that I really like is I think it's very bouncy and very, like, you know, it's just very, very dancey music. I mean, it is house music, but it's like the bounciness of it is very important, I feel like. So it's something that I try to accentuate with percussion when I'm making, like, grooves like this. And that was really the purpose of this percussion in this beat. And really nothing too much to say there. I mean, it's just doing like this kind of simple pattern. You know, you can probably put these in yourself. It's really just, again, about finding like cool samples. And with these, I really didn't have to do too much processing because they were already mostly to where I wanted them to be. Next thing I'll show you is the kick, which sounds like this. And the original sample sounds like this. So as you can hear, there's a little bit of a difference there. The original sample is a lot softer, and it doesn't have such a strong punch to it and such a strong attack. And the reason for that is because in this simpler, I've actually added a pitch envelope. So if you don't know what a pitch envelope is, as you know, an envelope is something where you have like the attack and sustain and decay and release. And what you can do is you can set these so that it sort of like goes down over time, or goes up and goes down, or all that kind of stuff. And so what I did with this was I set this pitch envelope with no attack, no sustain, a very small amount of release, just whatever was the default setting, I guess, and then a little bit of decay. And what this does, I also turned it up plus 24. What this does is it just adds a punch right at the beginning of the sound. So I'll show you without it and then with it. So you can pretty much see it here. I mean, it's not showing you like the sound or anything, but you can see basically what's happening is right at the beginning of the sound, it's starting up here, and then like right after that, pretty much at the very end of the transient, it's just going back down to the original pitch. And that's how you get that kind of like punchy sound. So pitch envelopes, if you're at all familiar with synthesizing drums, you'll know, and synthesis in general, you'll know that this is like a pretty important part of making like punchy, kind of hard-hitting drums. And it's a good thing to do when you have a sample like this, where I really like the texture of this sound, and it fit lo-fi house really well, and it fit this beat really well. But it just wasn't quite punchy enough, so I added that pitch envelope to give it a bit more punch. And then I really didn't do any other processing to that, but it didn't need it. So the last two things are pretty simple. Is this cassette noise. I mean, pretty straightforward for lo-fi house, as you may know, especially if you've seen my tutorials. Putting a bit of cassette noise or vinyl noise in the background can really add a lot of like nice sort of texture to your sounds, and just really give it like that atmosphere that you want for like the lo-fi sound. And then the last thing is actually this sort of like metallic cymbal sound that I put together here. Sounds like this. I'll turn off this thing. So essentially, what this is this little cymbal that I found. And what I did was I put it into the granulator for Max for Live. So if you don't know what the granulator is, you probably do if you've seen my tutorials. But the granulator is basically a granular synth that comes for Max for Live. It's free. The link, I'll put the link in the description so you can just go and get it. It's made by Robert Henke, the guy who I believe created Ableton. And what it is it's a granular synth. So what a granular synth is essentially it takes your sound and it plays it back like a sampler would. But as you can see by this little line, it's pulling parts from all across the sample. So you get this kind of fluctuation in volume that feels, and in texture in a lot of cases. With this sound, it's mostly with volume, but with other sounds, you would get a lot more kind of fluctuations. But you get this sort of fluctuation that feels really natural and like really organic and just gives it a really nice texture. So I put this in here just to give this kind of thing in the background, this like ringing kind of sound. I just thought it sounded kind of nice and it really fit the beat well and helped to give it some nice atmosphere. As far as processing goes on that, I have a bit warmer on there. So again, that's just that one saturator preset that I talked about earlier. And then I have this EQ8, which is the same one that was on the hi-hats actually. And I figured since this is so similar to the hi-hats sonically, that I would just kind of copy that over. So I'll show you without that. It's not doing too much. It's mostly cutting off the high end and then giving it that little bump there, like I was talking about. Because this just had a little bit too much high end for this mix and to fit the vibe of this kind of like lo-fi house sound that I was going for. So I had to cut that out. And then I cut the low end. I couldn't really hear much. And if you look at it, there's not much going on down there, but I always like to just cut it just to be careful. And then after that, I have this auto pan, which is doing like a kind of fake sidechain effect, kind of similar to like Volume Shaper or LFO Tool or Kickstart or one of those. And you can actually do this very simply with Ableton's auto pan. All you have to do is just basically grab an auto pan, and what you do is you turn the phase down to 0. So what happens is with auto pan is, as you can see, when the phase is up to 180, what it's doing is basically turning the volumes of the left and right ear up and down in sort of like this weird fluctuation, which causes the auto panning effect. If you turn the phase down to 0, what happens is it's just controlling the volume of the mono signal, and thus you just get this volume shaper basically. So all you have to do once you do that is just shape it to kind of give a sidechain effect. So what I do to do this is I switch it to the saw wave mode and then flip it or invert it so it's like going up like that. And then all you have to do is switch this to beat synced mode and then put it on quarter notes, and there you go. You get like that kind of fake sidechain effect. And you can even shape it a little bit with this shape knob. Like however you want it to be. With this one, I turned that up a little bit. And yeah, I just sidechain it because like I think that kind of like with house music a lot of the time, the groove can really help the groove to sidechain sounds like this that are just long things, because like if you just have this long metallic sound going over top of the whole thing, I mean it's cool, but it definitely feels a lot more at home when you have this on. It almost makes you bob your head a little bit more, so I think it's kind of important. But yeah, that's really it for this tutorial. I mean, there's not too much to say. Again, it's just a matter of like finding samples that work and already have that feeling, and then sort of taking them that last little bit of the way. Or in the case of the hi-hats, I mean, finding samples that are very editable and you can do a lot of stuff with, and just sort of playing around with that. But either way, you can pretty much get the sound. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments, and like this video and subscribe. Maybe even share the video if it really helped you out. You can get the samples and project file from this video in the description as well. It's the first link. Can't miss it. Thank you so much, everybody, for all the support, and I will see you guys again tomorrow with another tutorial.